some people could not attend, so I was asked if I could record. So just a few details before giving the floor to Kim. You cannot unmute yourself because of the setup, but you are more than welcome to comments or to ask questions in the chat. Violeta Tsenova has gladly and thank you accepted to monitor the questions, so she's going to keep track so that Serge, Kim, and I can concentrate on the screen and talk, and she will moderate the questions and the comments. So thank you, Violeta. Without further ado, I give the floor to Kim. Thank you so much for helping us tonight, Kim.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Kimberly Smith, and I'm the Senior Editor for History at Routledge. It's great to be here today to celebrate Thomas's birthday and the launch of the second edition of such a fantastic and influential book, Public History, a Textbook of Practice. So the first edition of the book came out of discussions between Thomas and the publisher, M.E. Sharp, back in 2013, before it moved to Routledge in 2014 and published in 2016. In the first year of publication, the book became an immediate hit, with instructors adopting the book in classes across North America, the UK and Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, as well as Australasia. It's been praised for its concise and accessible writing style, its comprehensive coverage of both theory and practice of public history, and its wide international scope. With so much growth in the field over the last 5 years, in 2019, I approached Thomas about working on a new edition of the book, which very gladly he accepted. The increasing popular interest in understanding the past better to understand the present has given rise to an exciting new number of courses in the subject, including new master's programs at institutions globally. Historians have seen the increasing importance of being able to communicate their work and research to the public, and this has led to new and innovative ways of doing so by both scholars and practitioners around the world. This new iteration of the book provides a vital guide for the latest cohort of students and historians who want to be able to teach public history to the public and communicate effectively. With Thomas's work on different public history projects in both North America and Europe, and his recent role as the 2018 to 2021 president for the International Federation of Public History, he's been able to pour his knowledge of international debates and practices into the new edition, which I hope you'll find there. So too has its experience working with different media, including documentaries, podcasts, and an artistic fresco, amongst other things, has helped him to update the range of practices taught in the book. The new edition is forward-thinking, discussing the opportunities and challenges for work by public historians now and into the future. It's a true champion of the growing importance of public history for individuals and within communities on both a small and a large scale. And so I'm now delighted to pass you over to Professor Thomas Calvin, a Tract Fellow and Associate Professor of Public History at the Centre of Contemporary and Digital History at the University of Luxembourg. And he leads the Public History as the New Citizen Science of the Past project, which goes up until 2025. As well as being president of the International Federation for Public History from 2018 to 2021. And also Professor Serge Noiret, historian, former librarian of the European University Institute, former president of the International Federation for Public History, and current president of the Italian Association for Public History, and editor, as I'm sure many of you know, of the Handbook of Digital Public History. So over to you both.
Serge, I think I can simply give you the floor so that you can ask any questions you want. You're on mute, Serge.
Okay. Thank you, and hello, everyone. I see that you are coming from very different latitudes, so we have very different timetables. I'm very pleased to be here for many reasons. The first one is because Thomas is a friend for many years, and we were together at the European University Institute, and also because I think his book has a very important importance in the field we are all playing with, which is public history. So I don't want to say a lot of things. This is Thomas' birthday, this is Thomas' presentation. So I want him to say about his book much more than what I could say myself. If I want to, I will do a review and you will know more about the book. I have only three questions. The first one is linked to the two edition of the book. The second one will be on, and we'll go into the detail about internationalization of the field through the new edition. And the third one will be about the digital field that is growing a lot and has supported a lot the development of public history in the last 25 years. So the textbook, from the first to the second edition, Thomas, textbook we know should have defining a discipline and also support teaching activities, and your very important textbook is no exception here. I think it's really important to support teaching in many countries. But the content of your textbooks changed a lot because I was on the presentation in Rome in 2016 of your first edition, and the structure of the book changed. Not to say about also some graphical changes because you added some focus examples dealing with important aspects of public history worldwide. The first edition, 2016, had an introduction which dealt with the definition of the field before the three different parts of the organization of your book. This structure changed between the first and the second edition, in which there are now four different parts and not three. The definition of the field that became a full part, and the future of the field with an important chapter on internationalization of public history, the sources for doing public history, the way to narrate and perform public history, and four, I summarize it, applied history in different contexts, like the teaching of public history. So if you did a second edition, it's because the first, like we just heard, had a lot of success, right? So hence my questions connected to the passage from the first edition to the second. Can you say something about the impact of your textbook's first edition in classrooms worldwide, and about what do you expect with this deeply transformed second edition? Have you some ideas of where the first edition had more success? Which countries, for instance? You have feedback in this sense? And can you explain with why you decided to transform your textbook and rebuild this structure of your second edition? This is more or less what I would like to ask in my first question. Thank you.
Thank you, Serge. I've been working with you, and you were the one introducing me to public history in 2009. So again, thank you for all you've done. Important question about what I changed in the book, and it's not only, but I think it's about public history and how public history has changed in the last 5 or 6 years. About the reviews, and I think I'm going to start with that. It's hard to tell exactly what the reviews were. I mean, they were, probably positive, but Routledge organized another round of reviews. So the book was sent in 2019 through Kim to a dozen of people saying, what do you think is missing, or what do you like in the book? I'm not going to go into detail, but the 2 or 3 points that people liked or wanted more about is first international, and I think that was one of the caveats of the first one, which is pretty natural. It was very North American because that's where I was living and impacted. People wanted more digital and digital public history. And they also wanted to challenge this very North American view of public history, and often very academic view of public history. And they were all valid comments. So it made me think about what I would change in the book, and I ended like adding new chapters. I'm going to talk about what new chapters, and changing the overall chapters. So I think, at least my understanding of the field has changed because of the international meetings, projects, people that I've met. And I think David Dean, who's part of the IFPH, International Federation for Public History, has a great answer when he's asked, why international public history? He says not to communicate public history to the world, but how the world can enrich his own view of what public history is. So not this missionary posture of, I'm going to tell you what public history is, but asking people in Brazil or learning from people in Brazil how they do oral history, activism, and public history, and how that makes us question what public history is internationally, right? So I think the field has become more nuanced, more complex because of the many public histories and the many different understandings of public history. If you do historic preservation in China, it's very different than doing public history in the US, for example. So my chapter on historic preservation was very much about, the historic preservation in the US. So I had to rethink about, okay, let's have a more nuanced approach of historic preservation and include different approaches of historic preservation. And so my introduction, that was 25 pages in 2016, is now 80 pages of chapters, right? Because instead of giving a history of public history, where it comes from and what public history is, I'm trying to discuss some very important aspects. So there's one chapter about shared authority, which is one of the very important current discussion about how to work with people. There's a new chapter about digital public history, and you know better, Serge, because you're writing or you're editing this book on digital public history. I think it's booming. It's also changing the whole field of public history. There's a new chapter on international public history because it raises some questions about the different approaches and what international encounters can do for the field. And some question about, should we define public history if the field is so nuanced or complex? So instead of having 25 pages of introduction telling what I think public history is, now it's 5 chapters of questions, basically, about what does that mean to work with? What does that mean to work for this kind of field? So I think this is one of the main changes in the book, on top of additional chapters on fiction, which was perhaps one of the most challenging chapters. A new chapter on public history and fiction, which goes beyond the usual, historians say it's inaccurate in fiction, and that's it. I'm trying to bring a more nuanced approach of public history and fiction, public history on fiction. And so this is an example of a new chapter which is directly answering the debates about The Crown, about Bridgerton, about the Netflix TV shows, and what they say about public history. So I think those are the main changes: more international, more digital, and I think more plural. You're still muted.
Yes. So yes, it's exactly what I want to go on. About the internationalization of the field. What is really important to see from the first to the second edition is so many new examples you introduce in all your chapters transversally about practices, projects, ideas that are populating the other continents, not only North America. And this is absolutely a very important thing for I think the second edition, maybe the most important one. So you mentioned how in very few years the field of public history has been largely internationalized, starting from its mainly North American presence from the 80s and the 90s. Public history has followed the North American path and model with few journals, with few introductory texts, all in English, when now we discover a more global field, new languages, new teaching courses, new approaches, and also something that in your chapter of internationalization you have added, it's about national public history. So reflection about what does it mean to, and if there is a national approach to public history, something I think is existent in Italy, at least some characteristic of it. So in your second edition, you insist a lot on these changes, which motivates the changes. You introduce the third chapter, International Public History. And I would like to ask you two questions about this. Do local practices and methods have now really influenced globally public history? Or, if I may raise this question in a different way, is public history a global discipline now based on local practices repeated everywhere? And the second part of this question linked to internationalization, connected to this process of internationalization, what is up to you still missing in the field to be widely recognized also by traditional academic historians as a respectable branch of the historical science internationally? Up to you, Thomas.
Thank you. Well, on international public history, I still hear some echo, right? It's good now? Okay. International public history. Just to give you an example, I was in a public history summer school with some of you 2 weeks ago in Wrocław, in Poland. And there was an historian from Brazil, Danny, who was presenting about how authority is constructed in some social media discussions, right, about history. And her approach actually engaged with Petros within the audience today, who has been doing a PhD on authority on Wikipedia, right? And they've been talking together, reusing different approaches that you can also reconnect to Jason Steinhauer, who's in the audience, who has recently published this book about how social media have changed history or e-history, right? And those discussions are linked to authority, what authority is on social media. And Jason would argue that it's about data much more than expertise, right? And Danny was also talking about different sort of authority, about gatekeeper versus knowledge bearer. So I think those people may have local research or they may have local practices, but they talk together. And in Wrocław, in Poland, they were talking together about, oh, maybe we should rethink about the concept of authority in the digital age, which is, you know, a broader question, but that's inspired by local or national examples. So I think there are frameworks and networks that now allow people to engage their local practices, local approaches of public history to broader discussion about authority, about expertise, about what history means, right? About arts as history, right? We had also discussions about that. So I do think there are ways to engage and to enrich public history from local practices. So this, I would be optimistic in saying this. Now about national trends. I know we've been talking a lot about that, Serge. I do think there are some national criteria, especially in the structure of how you define public history as a field of practice. For example, in Italy, you have a very specific way of doing this. So I think there are national trends, but I wouldn't call national public histories, because I would think that doing public history in a museum in Wrocław is more connected to doing public history in another museum in Italy than connected to a Polish public history. So I do think that the subfield is sometimes much more important than the country, right? And I know we would agree on that, but I think the national public history ID may work for the structure of the field much more than in the practice themselves. Now, what is missing? Well, we've been wondering for that in the last 10 or 15 years. I think one is to have less academics. I don't know in the room how many of you work or connect with a university and would not. And I think that's one issue. The field of public history is and I'm part of the problem, monopolized, controlled by academics because they have position, because they have power, because they can travel, right? So that's something with the International Federation that we have been trying to, open up, to have more people from practitioners in museums, in archives. It's not always easy because of the privilege that academics have. I think that's one thing we should develop in international public history. The second thing that we could do is to create frameworks so that the non-Western public histories enrich the field, right? Because it's still controlled by English-speaking publishers, and again, I'm part of the problem, by English-speaking people, right? We have public history in Indonesia, in Jakarta, in South Africa, in Nigeria, in Chile, that should be able to impact and influence the field much more than they do. And I think language is a problem, so we should create frameworks in which people from Brazil in Portuguese can influence people in France, even though they don't speak the same language. So I think this is a challenge, very difficult, but something I would love to discuss. In Wroclaw, we were talking about the very concept of decolonizing public history, right? Is that something, right? Because public and history are sometimes considered in very Western ways, and other people in different countries may have different understanding. So at least having some framework in which we can discuss those questions would enrich the field even more.
Yes, thank you. The idea of the languages is central. It's central for I think now 30 years at least in digital humanities, but in digital humanities we have maybe a similar program to become global and to have experiences from different continents and not only coming from North America. So the other aspect which is new in your book is the impact of the digital revolution. So are we talking about digital public history or doing public history in the digital age or both? There are concepts, but written this way, it's different. If we think that there is a discipline behind, there is a subdiscipline, there is a field, technologies are influencing the content or not. There is a lot of possibility to discuss. So for sure, during the last 25 years, the digitization of the humanities and of the discipline of history revolutionized the way we research, we write, we contextualize, we describe our sources now. And maybe the subdiscipline of public history was even more revolutionized through the digital because of public history practices that were developed with and for the public and are now enormously, like you have said already, facilitated by the web and by the digital. The digital raised many important questions, especially for the interdisciplinarity way public historians share their authority, because this is, I think, one of the terms that we should also point in, interdisciplinarity, which is also answering a bit to what you said about academics, not only in academics, because we are working with a lot of people that have other professional capacities. So anyway, your chapter 5 is deeply renovated and tackled this transformation and how the web helped to engage more profoundly in collaborations with the public. So hence my question, can you explain us better your decision to dedicate more space to digital public history or doing public history in the digital age? with the new edition. It's absolutely, like I said about internationalization, the digital is also transversal to all your chapters. The examples are there in all your chapters, and always the digital is present. What are, so up to you, the most important changes the digital, social media, artificial intelligence contributed to in the many practices of public history with, if you want, some characteristic examples you may quote. Thank you, Thor.
Thank you, sir. You're right, there is digital in all chapters. But I thought that digital public history deserves a specific chapter. And you're the expert, right? Your handbook, it covers the whole field. So it's much more humble in the TechBits one chapter, which is less about the nuts and bolts on how to do digital public history, but about the issues at stake. So I've changed that chapter, and I've changed the part of public history. To answer your question, when you ask how public historians can share, I don't want to talk on his behalf, but I think Jason Steinhauer, who said that people do not need historians, and most of history, or what he calls history online, is done without historians, right? So I think us thinking that we need to share authority is sometimes utopic, because people don't need us. Sometimes people don't want us, and they are doing perfectly fine writing their blog on tweeting about history. And people have more followers than most of all our books together, right? So I don't think the question is about how do we share authority. I think the first question is how to read or to occupy the public sphere, because as historians in universities or historians outside universities, how do we reoccupy the public sphere? And how can we make our students more active and present online, for example, right? Because again, people don't need us, right? People make their own YouTube channel. They may not be good, but some people watch it. So the question is, what tools and what strategies do we need as historians to reoccupy the public sphere, to be accessible? Because I think that's one of the problems and why we need training in public history. Because most of the time historians are not good speakers, historians are not good writer for lay audience. So we need all to learn more about the tools to be accessible, right? Before sharing, we need to be accessible, or we need to work with people to make it accessible. So a lot of the chapters are about how to be more accessible, right? So to people who will never read a history book or watch a historical documentary, how can we make ourselves and the projects and the museums and the institutions more accessible, right? So I think the digital help in doing this. The second thing, which is very important for me in digital public history, is about authority. We go back to this question and you say, can we share authority? It's about how do we work with people online? And I think this is perhaps the most exciting part of public history nowadays, right? Redefining authority, expertise, right? And I came up with this idea of, instead of saying you versus me, I share authority so I lose authority. I'm thinking more in terms of combined authority. The word doesn't come from me. It's from Letting Go, the book in 2013. Combining expertise, people having different expertise, right? So historians may have some expertise, witness have some expertise, media persons have some expertise, and combining authority in digital public history project to reach a more nuanced, a richer type of project is something that I think digital public history helps. Also because it connects people from different parts of the world. And then the space of participation is very different. If you're a museum and you do community practice, local community practice, but now if you do digital public history with, and we have some partners with people all over the world, doing about diaspora or talking about COVID memories, right? You changes not only participation, but the framework of participation. And that's something that the digital is very good at. So occupying the space, rethinking authority, adapting to new form of authority are, I think, the most challenging questions, because the concept of authority and historian sharing authority is quite challenging, and also sometimes not even the appropriate question, because some people don't want to share history with us. So I think that's why the digital takes a very important part in the book.
Well, thank you, Thomas. I think we can now open the floor now to the public to raise other questions. The only thing I may say to add to what you just mentioned is that the shared authority up to me is not only with the public or the people we are working in a project, but a lot in digital public history with other professional figures. So with people that can be librarian, archivist, web engineers, oral historian, museum people. So we have, I think the first step is the interdisciplinarity of the project that is growing with digital public history, and which makes of public history, I think, a very important playground where different disciplines can collaborate together and express themselves in another way. There will be soon a new handbook of public sociology, and public sociology has a lot of to say to public historians in the way they do they apply their disciplines. So that's it. I don't want to say more, and if you agree, then I think there are questions from the public.
Yeah, happy to give the floor to Violeta, who's been moderating the questions.
Yeah, hi, evening everyone. Thank you for your patience with me pasting the same message, because we kept getting newcomers, which is great. So I'll start with two comments that both relate to, I guess, to the the field becoming more international and the globalization of the field. So Jason commented earlier, Thomas, when you were talking about the Wrocław public school and the connection of the different perspective and the practices in different countries. He commented that, yeah, we need to link these conversations. And he also praised you for being critical in linking practitioners around the world. And then Andre also commented that as a discipline born in North America, and now moves to globalization, public history seems to face similar challenges and a comparable evolution to the also US-born discipline of international relations. So maybe you want to give a quick comment on that. And then Maya just asked a question that brings us to the digital with regards to the significance of the digital. Could one also then say that virality is a new form of authority? So answer these ones and I'll keep collecting new ones.
Thank you, Jason. Yeah, I saw your comment. I agree with you. I'm still thinking about your concept of your history, but I really like the questions that you bring about authority that connects to the comment on virality. Someone asking if virality is a form of authority. Again, not talking on your behalf, but Jason would say yes. And I would agree. And it's the Google algorithm and what you find online. Virality makes like a form of authority. I'm not saying that it's authentic. I'm saying that it has a form of authority, and that we have to be aware of that. The question is not to completely change your research to reach virality, but if you want to occupy the space, you need to adapt the format of your research to something that is viral. It's the same as you're writing an essay, then you're asked to do an exhibition. You cannot transpose your essay into a text panel. The same thing online, right? You cannot adapt your essay into something of 140 characters on Twitter, right? So you have to think about the mediation of your research. About the North American field of public history, I wouldn't think there is one field of public history in the US, because you have different approaches like activism and radical public history, or more consulting for clients. So I think there are many subfields. But what is specific to, I believe, Western public history is the focus on universities and academia. And it doesn't work in some non-Western countries. If you deal and if you discuss about public history in Kenya or Nigeria, you wouldn't talk about universities, right? You would talk about different public history practices. And if we keep thinking in terms of the Western public history, university connecting with museums, and that, I think that's limited, right? Also because the university itself is a sign of post-colonial power in some countries, right? And talking with colleagues in India, you have this concept for some Indians that the university is a form of post-colonial power, right? I'm not saying that we should not do public history in universities. I'm saying that the university should not always be the sole or the main place of public history. And it's the same thing for history. People have different understanding of history, right? Corinne was in Wrocław in public history summer school, and she was showing how artists in Cambodia were doing public history. But this would not be defined as public history in the Western concept of historiography, right? So I think that's what I meant in saying that we need to talk more with different approaches of public history to see what history means, what sharing authority means, and what authority in the digital age can mean.
Thank you, Tuma. I will group two questions that I think are currently linking to what we're talking about. So Marike asked, what exactly do you mean by reclaiming and occupying the public sphere? And how is this an answer to the problem that some people don't want or don't need as historians? To which, interestingly, Susan Smith-Peter earlier messaged, what is the best way to reach the largest number of public historians? Because Susan has been approached by a curator of the Second World War Museum in Kiev, who wants to find places for a traveling exhibit on the history of the war in the first month, which was collected by interesting crowdsourcing methods. So here we both have a need and a not need for public historians. And after you answer this, I'll ask one more question from Matus.
Thank you. Yes, super good question. First question about what does that mean to reclaim or occupy the public sphere? Well, I would understand that as making history in the form of based on historical methodology, based on sources and evidence. I'm not talking about publication. I'm talking about a methodology of doing history in museums and so on, more accessible online, because, and surveys have shown that most of the project of the discussion about history are done without historians or without any evidence or sources. So by reoccupying or occupying the public sphere, I would think about giving the tools to, for example, my students to be accessible, to be visible, not necessarily convincing people. Some people will never be convinced by anything, and we're talking about that for Brazil and negationist and revisionism. The point is not to convince people, because some people don't want to be convinced, and that's way more challenging to think about convincing people, but being accessible, right? And making our work, again, exhibition, archiving, family history, more accessible and more public. Because if you make it more accessible, you make it more public, people may disagree with, but at least more accessible. And the second thing is to make it more transparent. And I think that's where we talk about convincing, because the problem of, we go back to the web. The web is about the final product or opinions, right? And you don't see the structure. You don't see the backhand, how history is done, right? And most people would have no idea how historians work, and that the fact that historians can disagree. And so making public history project more transparent. How do we come to that conclusion? With whom? How do we disagree? I think this is something that may help to convince some people, or at least make them understand how we make history and the fact that we can disagree, but we have some, sort of understanding of how to do history. So making it more transparent may help. Also because public history is participatory, so making it transparent about who's doing history. If you work with different partners, individuals, community groups, how are they part of the authorship of the project? Because most of the time academics get the credit and the partners don't. So making the whole project more transparent about who's doing what, who's talking, and whose voice and whose voices are in the public history project may help to make public history more transparent and more reliable. The second question about how to reach different and how to reach broader audiences. Again, depends the context, depends your audience, young, less young. I mean, that would impact the kind of social media you use, Facebook or Snapchat or Instagram. Depends whom you want to reach. But I would argue that we need to master more popular medium. That's why I like my students to do podcasts, because it helps them to write for a broad audience. So it's script writing. They have to translate their research into a script. Podcast, they need to learn how to speak, which is not that easy, right? How to engage through podcasting. So that's a way that you can reach people who may not be interested in history, right? Because they can listen to you while, cooking in the kitchen, right? And you may touch people who would never have read a history book. So having some popular medium or understanding how history can be produced through a podcast, through a film, and the specific skills that you need, specific archive that you need, can make our students, can make ourselves more accessible, and then reoccupy the public space. And then what medium to use for your exhibition? Well, it depends. Again, your partners, your network. I think it's a more specific question.
Okay, so I'm gonna go back to Matthew's question from earlier on, which is a little bit more practical in terms of teaching outreach. So what would be the key difference between non-formal history pedagogy, for example, tools like guided tours with the class, so taking the students on a guided tour, and that's in comparison to more traditional public history in the classroom. So what is the key difference? I guess maybe we're looking at for what is the benefit. And then Jason probably has a little bit more existential question around the fact that academics don't see their peers in museums and government, etc., as equals. And do you have advice on how to change the culture within academia to view non-academics as their equals? So, floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. I don't remember who asked the question about pedagogy, but thank you for the question. I would say that there are two. I never opposed academic history and public history because there's no point. We need academic research to do public history, and all academic history has some sort of public. Instead of opposing, I always think in terms of levels of public engagement. Projects are more or less publicly accessible, and they're more or less participatory. But I don't oppose academic to public history. But what I would say, a public history assignment, for example, are first about different publics. Not me, not the instructor, but for a broader audience. And that changes a lot. Instead of asking my students to write an essay for me about the history of World War II resistance in Luxembourg, I'm asking them to write a podcast, not for me, but for a broad audience, with all the problems about talking about the resistance and the collaboration in Luxembourg. So it brings a broad new layer of consideration. Whom are you talking to? And how do you engage with people? So that's the first thing. Public history is not for instructors, it's for different publics. And the second is about production. I like them to have a product. So not an essay. They think about what they do and they write a reflective part, but it's about producing something outside the university. So it could be a guided tour, and I've asked my students to do as a final exam to do a guided tour about the history of beer in Colorado. So that was very exciting. Or it could be a podcast, or it could be an exhibition, or it could be an archiving strategy, right? So I want a project, and it's very often team building, because public history for me is made by groups. So you need to learn to work with colleagues, with people that you don't agree with. So I think this would be another part of the differences. So more project and more participatory. For Jason, existential question about making historians more open. Well, I think there's for decades we have been thinking as ourselves, and I mean historians as experts, and we are experts. But that's one of the many expertise that there is. I think my solution would be to have more projects. I think that's through projects that I learn from partners, and I learn what my partners can bring me. So if you're willing to create projects, you're already willing to work with someone, and through successful projects, you see, as an historian in university, in museums, in archives, you see what the partners can bring you, and not thinking of people as sources, because that's one of the problems of historians. We work with people to collect our history, sources, in a very passive way, right? And some people, historians, they go, they interview someone, they collect the interview, and that person never hears back from historians, right? Because historians think about people as sources. If you think of people as partner, it changes the whole thing. I mean, you're reliable, you're responsible, you need to ask their permission. It's also for your interviewee. So going back to Jason's question, projects and partnership to rethink who has authority and who has expertise in doing public history.
Okay, we just got a very long message that's for Jason. And maybe, I don't know, maybe we can either leave Jason to answer and then read that out loud, and while Jason ponders that question, I'm gonna ask you another one on my side, if that's okay. So maybe we can think about the silences in your book, as in you spoke a lot about what you added and what chapters you added, but you must have missed things that maybe you didn't have space for or didn't have the time to research. So what would you have liked to have included, but you didn't manage to, basically?
Sure. I mean, that's why we need a third edition. I mean, Kim asked me to silence a few things so that we have still a few things for 2025. No, joking apart. Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that's something that I've kind of avoided, consciously or not, is about memoirs. For the simple reason that
If I may, it's exactly what I wanted to ask you. It's about memory and also identities connected to memories. If it's a concept that we can use as public historians, especially now because of everything which has been done by international organization on heritage, you know, UNESCO and the Council of Europe, the Faro Convention, where they decided that they are communities of identity and memories, where of course public historians have a lot to say. I think this is maybe a silence that maybe digged better in a new edition, or you say something about heritage, of course, but I mean the idea of the concept that local communities are dealing with heritage and they have memories as local communities, and we have spaces for public historians there.
Yes, thank you, Serge. I kind of deal with memories in the chapter about shared authority, because that's the big question about when people remember something and someone's, well, no. So how do you deal with that? And also deal with memories in the chapter about politics, because it's memory and politics and identity. But that's the very reason why I don't like memories and memory. And I may hurt some people, but I don't think that's a very useful concept. At least not memories. Memorialization, yes. But how many presentations have seen about, oh, this is how those people are represented in that TV show, or this is how the World War II is represented in that. I'm sorry, I've seen and read too many studies about representations of memories, and there's only one thing missing, is about people, actors, who's doing what. And that's the big loophole in memories. Memorialization, yes, it's about the process. It's about the sources of the process. It's about the actors, the disagreement. But memories, for me, it's not a very useful concept. I can talk about how memorization plays a role in public history, yes. And I would never oppose history and memories. I think that's one of the flow about memories, and the Pierre Nora quotation that we got all the time. Yes, Pierre Nora talk about memories and lieu de mémoire. So what? I mean, the process is about memorialization. It's about whose voice are included, whose voice are silenced by whom. And to me, Michel Rolf-Trouillot about silencing the past is way more useful than the lieu de mémoire, because it's about the production of history. It's about who has been silenced and by whom. And if you apply that, you understand why the Confederate monuments are not memories, but they are silencing, process of silencing. So yes, for memory studies, if it's about actors of memorization, but not memories as a topic, because then we go back to this position of historians studying memories as a topic, right? And not taking part in public history, because those historians would say, what you're doing is not history, it's memory, right? So I refuse to oppose memory in history, and I maybe, consciously, or I was aware of not using memories too much in the book. It may deserve more discussion about identity and identity politics, whom you want to work with, and who decides to work with whom, yes. But memories, yeah, maybe a few more lines in the next edition.
Okay, brilliant. So just earlier, when Clarissa commented that in the US, that's going a little bit back to our discussion of collaborations and the importance of collaborations to changing the views of historians. So she mentioned how in researchers situated in the digital humanities centers and public history programs, etc., they actually have bigger networks, and they include like more sustained relationships with other people working in archives, museums, community centers, etc. And then that takes it to more that being transactional. So it's just in the spirit of what we were discussing in the same way. Elizabeth just also messaged, thank you for the engaging conversation. And part of the tension within our department comes from graduate students who want to gain public history experience to make themselves more broadly marketable. But this adds to their already overfull workloads. Any idea on how we can help these students? And I'm pretty sure you do have some opinions. Okay, we are going again to Clarissa after that, who is asking, how can international collaborators among public historians help broaden our perspectives on the discipline? And can you think of examples where multinational projects promoted cross-learning among practitioners and or students? And there is one more question, which is quite long, actually 2 more questions. So let you comment on these ones, and then I'll ask the other ones.
Thank you. Thank you. Great questions again. Elizabeth, on too much, graduate students doing public history, being marketable, and the fact that it's a lot. Yes, and I think we are all very excited by public history, and we are all asking too much to our students because we have colleagues, oh, they have to be super good historian and good researcher first. Okay, so we include more research seminars. And then you have a little bit, oh, but they need to be able to communicate to different publics. So we do something about podcasting and media studies. And then you add the digital. So it's a lot. It's also because of us who designed the training, because we're asking too much. We're asking to do PhD in public history with 300 pages of research and then interactive documentary on the same topic. It's too much, right? And some students burn out because of the stress, because of the additional work of doing research, communicating, working with. That's a lot. And I don't have a simple solution, but what I like to do is to work on project, because in one single project, you can do a bit of that research, original research, a little bit of script writing, and you do a project of a podcast. You don't maybe design the podcast, but you think about translating your research to a podcast. I've been experiencing this project to try to have ethics, self-reflection, research, and practice. It's not always works, but I think it's better than having like 12 courses on communication and 12 courses on research and so on. But that's a big problem in asking too much. Clarissa had two good questions. I think I missed the first one, but the second, and Violetta can remind me afterwards. But on international, yeah, I do think that international helps. Just to give you an example, I was talking with Anna Adamek from Ottawa, the Science Museum, National Science Museum, about shared authority and the fact that when they design an exhibition about a First Nation community, the First Nation community decides, has the final word. So it's not even shared authority. They decide, they own the history because it's about them. You said that to a curator in France, the curator would explore and burst out and say, well, this is not how history is done in France. And I was talking to Paula Hamilton, who has some similar question in Australia, in a post-colonial country, when, as a white historian, how can you tell the history of someone without even working with them? So that's an example of how international connects different understanding of shared authority, because we may have different understanding of shared authority, and that made me rethink about, oh, what's shared authority for me, right? And how does that differ from someone working with First Nation in Canada? So that would be an example that has been super important for me. Could be useful for a student project. We've seen some student project between the UK and the US about slavery and how different museums interpret differently the history of slavery in Liverpool and in the East Coast. So asking the students to, okay, why do we think this and why do we exhibit slavery this way, right? And what does the international connection bring to the discussion? So I do think it's possible. It's very difficult because of language, time difference, and the lot of work. But that is something I would like to see in the future.
Okay, the following two questions and comment are on three different things we've been discussing. So this is a great brain exercise, continuously switching between the themes and topics. But I will start with Kirill, who asked, what practices in the digital spaces can we describe as public history? So he explains that there are a lot of bloggers on YouTube and TikTok, Instagram, etc., who make content on historical topics and pose themselves as historians. So of course, maybe these people do have an academic training, but what matters in this case is that their audience thinks that they are historians, okay? So the following second question is, can we describe these people as digital public historians? And if we can do that, then the concept of shared authority doesn't work because they actively show their expertise so that the audience or the publics trust them. So with that audience that they're building in the trust of the audience, they construct and strengthen their authority. So this is something you were already discussing a little bit earlier, but maybe some more insights. Malena asked whether we can think of an anti-racist public history. Maybe what would that mean? And if that is possible, how can we rethink the relationship between public history and politics? Which I'm sure you have some insights or opinions on. And finally, Jimena brings the discussion to memory back a little bit and local identities. And that public history is very timely and relevant. Like these discussions around memory and local identities are timely and relevant. So in Latin America, there's many grassroots movements who are approaching spaces that public historians are opening, and these grassroots movements are becoming more visible. At least this is what I am understanding from the question, from the comment. And this is what is happening in Latin American memory venues and activism. So might be interested if you can link it to some of the other conversations we had in Wrocław in terms of insights on that, again, international perspective.
Thank you, Violeta. I think you're doing a tremendous job and a great job in making sense and putting these questions together. Kirill, the digital, I think there are, and again, Serge knows way more than I do about that, but digital public history for me would be about participation. I mean, for me, that's the key word. Talking about crowdsourcing, object and sources, talking about user-generated knowledge. I think this is those are examples of participatory public history online, and something that can be done in different spaces. So talking about citizen science applied to history, that I think is a very interesting field. How to make, and does it make sense to talk about citizen historians? There are some challenges, but applying citizen science to public history is a very interesting approach. So I think that's what digital public history means the most for me, this participatory aspect. What about people who say they are historians, if they have a YouTube channel, and are they historians? Well, it's not up to me to decide, because again, they build their own authority. They don't need me to tell if they are or are not. And so I don't think my opinion matters. What could matter is first, if they have valid, show, and there are a lot of YouTube channels, notably in France, who does a great work, working with them. And for example, working on the comments, because we talk a lot about the YouTube videos, but for me, the most important part are the comments, because that's where people engage and make public history. So collaboration with YouTubers can be exciting, or just making my own students part of these YouTubers, right? I remember one student that I had in Louisiana. It was the first time I was teaching documentary film and video, so in a very amateur way. And I asked him to do a video on the Creole of Couleur in Louisiana. And I think he has now more than 300,000 views for that video that we did with very little, with nothing, right? He has become a sort of reference on the topic, right? Because of this engagement, right? So he built itself an authority. And I think that goes back to the definition of authority. We do not control authority, and we don't control who is on or not. And doesn't mean that we have to agree with them, but we have to play with the same rules. So we have to know better how to engage and to be present in the public sphere. Malina's two comments about anti-racist. This is a big discussion about that I presented to you. Is public history from the left or from the right, right? Because there have been discussions about radical public history. Radical history, Raphael Samuel, this Marxist influence kind of public history, defending minorities, defending underrepresented voices. Activism, this is one way of doing public history. But you have the other way, you have a kind of neoliberal public history, which is about working for clients, working for banks, building archives for banks, or working for different clients. A very different approach of public history. And I'm not saying that one is better than the other. I think there is a discussion about what public means for those people, right? And that goes back to Wroclaw 2 weeks ago, where David Dean talked about why are we doing public history? I think that's the question. He mentioned the mobilization of knowledge, which is in itself a form of activism. I don't think activism is a problem as long as it's transparent, that you're saying, I'm doing this radical public history, I'm doing this counter archives because I want to support that group that's been silenced by official narratives, right? So my point would be to make it transparent, maybe anti-racist, yes, but you have to be aware of the consequences of taking that step. And for memories, yes, Latin America, Ecuador, I remember, Malena, the grassroots movements, and I think we should not fight grassroots movement. We should be inspired by them, right? By their activism and by their willingness to do and to care about history. So I would not see them as memories again, because I don't want to study them, right? I want to work with them and I want to support them, maybe to enrich, if I can, what they do. But I would not see that as a source. I would see that as a partner and as a project. And yes, it's very vibrant in Ecuador and Chile. I've noticed that, yes.
Okay, thank you everyone for your patience. And I know we're a few minutes over, but just on the topic of memory, the final comment we had from Petros is good point about memory and history that you were making earlier on, that you started to make earlier on, Thomas. So Petros thinks a problem in the historiography of public history is that many works have seen memory as a reflection of institutions, memorials, museums, media, movies, novels, etc. And these things shape the public's perception of the past. And then repeating this approach has ignored, to a great extent, the publicity of public memory. So they do not ask the public itself about its memories, but kind of, I guess, it's reproducing a form of public memory. And if I misinterpreted the comment, I'm sorry. And I think maybe this is the one to close with.
Yeah, that's a good comment. Again, I'm fed up with the studies that say what's wrong in that film, or what's wrong in that comics, or what's wrong in that. It may be wrong, yes, but do something, right? Historians are too comfortable in, and I don't want to antagonize too many colleagues there, but historians are too comfortable judging from the office about what's true or not. Yes, some fiction, most of fiction are sometimes inaccurate. But do something, right? Write your own fiction, write comic books, engage with people. So that's why I don't like using memories as a simple source. Judging that it's not true, it's not good enough. I'm doing the proper history because it's not valid anymore, right? Not saying that it's not right, true or not, but it's not valid because some people do not care. And on social media, even if you say that the crown is not accurate, people would still look at the crown and be inspired by the crown. So I think it's more interesting to continue the public debates about the crown, right? And what does the crown say about how the British think about the monarchy, and how they preserve the memories of the monarchy, or the memorialization of the monarchy. This is, for me, more useful than simply saying, well, this is not accurate. We need historians to do that, but I don't think that's the whole job of doing public history. Writing fiction is a great assignment that I'm asking my students to do, because it forces them to know what they know for sure, because they have archives, or at least they interpret archives, and what is possible, plausible, according to the research. We may think that this happened, right? We're not 100% sure. So it makes them think about what history is. History is an interpretation of the past. And just this, if they leave the class by, well, history is an interpretation based on some sources, we know things, other things are plausible, other things are not true. That's already a major gain for them.
And those are all the questions we've had
Okay.
so far.
Well, thank you very much. It's been incredible, and I'm gonna copy and save the chat because I see so many good and great comments and questions. So thank you so much for joining. Thank you, Kim, so much for helping us and for doing the introduction. Thank you, Serge, for the great questions. Violeta for putting everything together and making sense to the whole thing. And thank you all for your questions. I hope to see some of you in Luxembourg next week, not tomorrow because it's holiday, or in August in Berlin for the IFPH conference. That's going to be also very exciting. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Thomas.